We all feel it, don't we? The economic reality for Gen Z, Millennials, and Gen Alpha is different, harder. The American dream feels more like an expensive monthly subscription we can't quite afford. We're drowning in national debt, over $38 trillion. Our purchasing power seems to shrink every year, and everyone is pointing fingers. It's the Democrats' fault. No, the Republicans ruined everything. But who is actually right? Today, we're cutting through the partisan noise. We're not looking at talking points. We're looking at facts. Cumulative data, specifically laws and key decisions made by both parties from World War II all the way to today. We're going to answer the tough question: who has been most detrimental to America's long-term prosperity, specifically for younger generations? The result might surprise you. This isn't just about spending. It's about a fundamental shift in how our economy works. Stick around, because the understanding this history is the first step in figuring out how we fix it. To understand where we are, we have to see where it is that we started. Post-World War II America entered what's often called the Golden Age. Look at this. Debt actually went down relative to our economic output, known as GDP, for nearly 30 years. Government spending was high. Hello, GI Bill and interstate highways, but tax revenue and massive economic growth balanced it out. It wasn't perfect, but the long-term fiscal outlook seemed stable. So what changed? When did the tide start to turn? It wasn't just one party or one law. It was a series of compounding decisions over decades. Let's break down the distinct roles each party played. Let's start with a moment that changed everything. And we'll start with the Republican contributions. In 1971, Republican President Richard Nixon made a monumental decision. He ended the convertibility of the US dollar into gold. Before what's now commonly known as the Nixon shock, the amount of money in circulation was somewhat tied to physical gold reserves. Afterwards, the US dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed only by the full faith and credit of the government. This arguably is the single most important factor in long-term monetary expansion, or what people call printing money, and currency devaluation. It removed the primary constraint on deficit spending. Then, moving into the 1980s, the Republican economic model shifted significantly. Enter supply-side economics under Ronald Reagan. The idea was simple: cut taxes significantly, especially on businesses and the wealthy. And that wealth would trickle down, stimulating massive economic growth. Reagan signed major tax cuts like the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981. The intent was growth. What was the result? While the economy did grow, tax revenue dropped significantly. At the same time, military spending soared. Without equivalent spending cuts elsewhere, this created massive deficits. Under Reagan, the national debt nearly tripled. It actually increased by 186%. This became a recurring pattern for Republican administrations. Fast forward to George W. Bush, major tax cuts again in 2001 and 2003. Combined with the unfunded cost of the global war on terror of Iraq and Afghanistan, the national debt increased by about 101% during his two terms. And finally, you got Donald Trump. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, in addition to the Big Beautiful Bill, was another massive unfunded tax cut. When the 2020 pandemic hit, emergency spending exploded, adding $7.8 trillion to the debt in 4 years. So, the Republican contribution: a consistent pattern of cutting revenue in the form of taxes while increasing specific spending such as military and emergency spending, fundamentally, structurally embedding large annual deficits. Now, let's look at the Democratic side. Their economic focus has historically been Keynesian, meaning the government should spend money to boost the economy and expand social safety nets. The most significant cumulative impact came from Lyndon B. Johnson and his Great Society programs in the 1960s. He signed the Social Security Amendments of 1965, which created Medicare and Medicaid. These programs provided essential health care for millions, and their social impact is undeniable. However, from a purely fiscal standpoint, these programs became massive mandatory outlays. The problem wasn't their intent, but their design. They were funded by current worker taxes for current retiree benefits based on a much higher worker to retiree ratio than we have today. As the population ages, these programs automatically consume an ever growing portion of the federal budget. Critics call this a fiscal cliff for younger generations, who will be tasked with supporting a much larger elderly population with relatively fewer workers. These aren't just one-time spending bills. They are permanent, compounding fiscal obligations of the US government. Moving forward, the Democratic response to economic crises has been large-scale stimulus spending. In 2009, Barack Obama signed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which was $831 billion to combat the Great Recession. While many economists credit this with preventing a deeper depression, it combined with decreased tax revenue during the crisis, which led to a 74% increase in our national debt. And most recently, under Joe Biden, we saw the American Rescue Plan in 2021. This $1.9 trillion stimulus was injections driven, and many critics argue it was too much stimulus, acting as a primary trigger for the high inflation that we saw in the years 2022 and 2023. This inflation eroded the purchasing power and savings of everyone, but hit young people especially hard as they tried to build financial stability. The Democratic contribution, expanding long-term, structurally embedded mandatory spending programs like Medicare and Medicaid without sustainable long-term funding plans and using large-scale stimulus injections that risk triggering inflation. Now, here's where it really gets cumulative. We've talked about spending and deficits, but how does the government get all this money that it's spending without collecting enough through taxes? This is where money printing comes in, and both parties are deeply involved. This is primarily done through the Federal Reserve, which, although technically independent, works in concert with the government's fiscal needs. Since the Nixon shock, the Fed has had immense power. And starting around the 2008 financial crisis, they pioneered a powerful new tool called quantitative easing. Essentially, QE is the Fed printing trillions of dollars to buy government bonds and other assets. The intent is to keep interest rates low and stabilize the financial system. But look at the timeline. It started under Republican appointee Alan Greenspan lowering rates. It was exponentially expanded by Democrat appointee Ben Bernanke after 2008 under both Bush and Obama. And it was used massively again by Jerome Powell, appointed by Trump in response to the 2020 pandemic, and it continued under Biden, and it now continues under Trump. This is critical. Quantitative easing doesn't just increase the national debt clock. It devalues the currency. More dollars chasing the same goods means prices have nowhere to go but up. This is a subtle, ongoing form of taxation that disproportionately harms those who hold cash and haven't built asset value wealth. Gen Z, millennials, and Gen Alpha are the primary victims of this cumulative damage. Asset inflation, a side effect of QE, makes housing and stocks much more expensive. Younger generations are priced out of the housing market while the purchasing power of their wages absolutely stagnates. The wealth gap widens due to this, not necessarily because of hard work, but because those who already own assets get richer and those who don't find it harder to get started. So, who wins? The most detrimental award. It's not a simple answer because each party played a specific, interconnected role in creating this compounding crisis. The Republican harm was structural revenue side gaps. Their core method, major tax cuts under Reagan, Bush, and Trump, combined with continued or increased spending, specifically in the military and emergency categories. What's the cumulative impact of the Republicans? Entrenched large structural deficits, making the government consistently reliant on debt to operate. Also, ending the gold standard under Nixon, which removed the constraint on any party spending. What's the Democratic harm? Well, structural spending inside commitments. The core method, expanding mandatory entitlement programs under LBJ's Great Society and using large, often debt-fueled Keynesian stimulus, noted under Obama and under Biden. What's their cumulative impact? Well, it created unsustainable, growing long-term spending obligations with Medicare and Medicaid, and large spending injections that have contributed directly to purchasing power erosion and recent inflation. What's the shared harm? Well, the shared harm between Republicans and Democrats is fiat currency and devaluation. Both parties, through their interaction with the Federal Reserve, have embraced nonstop currency expansion and massive asset inflation through quantitative easing to stabilize the system today by sacrificing the long-term value of the currency tomorrow. Gen Z and millennials aren't just dealing with Democratic spending or Republican tax cuts. They're caught in a double squeeze that is the cumulative result of both. From the right, a hollowed out tax base means higher taxes or more debt for their generation to maintain the services. And from the left, unfunded entitlement programs mean a massive financial burden to support an aging population that didn't replace themselves evenly, and a large-scale stimulus risk that furthers inflation. And both sides benefit from the quiet theft that is currency devaluation. So, who hurt America the most since World War II? The answer isn't one party. It's the bipartisan abandonment of long-term fiscal sanity in favor of short-term political gains. Every president since Nixon has used the Fed's money printing power. Republican-led tax cuts have created gaps and Democratic-led spending programs couldn't fill. Democratic-led social programs have created obligations that Republican-led governments couldn't possibly fund without more debt. The result is a self-perpetuating cycle of debt and devaluation. The compounding effect, it's not a theory, it's our economic reality. And it's set to get exponentially worse for Generation Alpha if something doesn't change. So, what do we do? We have to stop blaming the other side and demand better from both. This isn't about being pro-tax or anti-social programs. It's about being pro-sustainability, pro our children's future, pro our grandchildren's future. It's about demanding that any new spending from either party comes with a realistic, funded long-term plan that doesn't just hand the bill to future generations. It starts with education and ending this toxic polarization that's going on right now. If we keep fighting each other on anything that's not the root cause, which is what these people want, we'll never see the system that's quietly robbing us all of us, you, me, everybody. And the other fix to this is switching to a hard money standard. If you cap what the dollar is backed by, or what we actually use as currency, if you cap it to the government, you will cap the spending of the government. And we can never allow the government to run on fiscal deficits and fiat currency ever again. And we need to start demanding this now, because if something doesn't change, we're in for a rough one. And we need to change this. We needed to change this in 1971. It's too late now, but we need to change this now. Guys, thank you so much for watching. This is the Debasement Index. My name is Angel Rios, and this is a channel solely focused on building capital in a fiat world together. Stop playing these Republican versus Democrat games and start building capital in this world of bullcrap money. And start demanding this from your representatives in Congress, in the House, in the Senate, and in the presidency, so we can save our country from this fiscal cliff that we're going towards. If you feel like I've earned your subscription, go ahead and subscribe. I greatly appreciate it. Hit a like or comment with your thoughts. Click the notification bell so you don't miss any future videos. And I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching, y'all.